She's been a counsellor since 2008. She is an EMDR facilitator, approved consultant, a certified EMDR clinician, certified daring way facilitator, and she is the host of a very good podcast. If you like podcasts, I listen to all the time, Adaptable Behavior Explained. She has 5 children, 3 of which have got military backgrounds, so she has a lot of background in trauma. I'm sure. Trauma. Let me introduce Kelly O'Hara.
Thanks, Melvin. My family and also my clinic, Infinite, is really, we're really big fans of what they do here at the Amen Clinic. Personally, years back, we attended my husband, that's Patrick, myself, and then our youngest son, who the psychiatrist described as our Ferrari with no brakes. I needed to see what's going on, because when you have a child that has, deficits, and we knew ADHD for sure since pretty much birth, and we knew anxiety, same thing since birth, that generational trauma, there's no getting around it. But I wanted him to see the data so that he could make informed decisions. So he's about 18 or maybe a tiny bit older than that, and was making some Ferrari with no brakes decisions. And I wanted him to see some scans. And so anyway, it was very effective in knowing what is going on. It gave us more grace behaviors. Of course, that doesn't change the need for boundaries and whatnot. But and he will say this, he's 22, and he will say, when I take the supplements that they told me to take, my life is totally different. Now, getting him to do it compliant, that's another story. So at least he knows what to do to make his life better. So I highly, highly endorse what they do over here. It's been really helpful. So like Melvin said, I'm an EMDR trainer and consultant, and through EMDRIA and certified therapist for many years. I have a personal affinity for EMDR therapy, having been a therapist CBT prior to learning EMDR. Because I found, raise your hand if you're a therapist. I should know my audience here. Okay, so a lot of therapists, and then raise your hand if you're EMDR trained already. Okay, so some of you, this will be a bit, repetitive or whatnot, but maybe you'll a phrase or two that you can share and borrow and whatever to make it more interesting as you talk about this with your clients. But my hope is that if those of you who aren't trained would like to be trained, that it doesn't seem like something you shouldn't do afterward. Personally, your clients come in, week after week, and it feels like play, record, rewind, because it's the cows and calves, right? It's the crisis of the day, it's the crisis of the week, and we can give them as many interventions as we can think of, and they're compliant, and they show up, and they do all the things that suggest they really want to get better, but it doesn't address the somatic show of what's going on in their body. It doesn't address the limbic system. And so when I went personally to a therapist, I saw a psychoanalytic therapist for about a year, and I was like, okay, great. He's not my dad. I'm not my mom. Why do I keep flipping out about this stimulus? I'm over it. I'm super over it. So I went over to an EMDR therapist. One of my professors had, really loved the EMDR and said, you have to learn about this. And so I started seeing an EMDR therapist. And my first time reprocessing, I was like, holy shit. That's why I keep getting flipped out. And it went right back. It's my dad. It's all this stuff that's unresolved, because the way memory is held when it's traumatically informed gets maladaptively encoded in our nervous systems. And it shows up with stimulus today as if it's happening again and again and again. And so, sorry, I'm super dehydrated. Add water to drink, like drinking water to my list of things I'm not doing well. My mouth is so dry. So anyway, I'm really passionate about this work. As soon as I started seeing my own EMDR therapist, I begged my company, please let me go. I know I'm green, but please let me get trained. Thank you. And so I got trained, and of course, then things started to really change clients. And I felt so empowered that I finally knew something that could make real lasting changes that were not just about what they know, but getting what they know to match what their body now shows up like. And so I do have a lot of bias towards bottom-up therapies. I know there's a place for talk therapy. I know it's so important for us to all understand why we show up the way we show up. I know it's important to have the education. Ultimately, we're learning beings, and we didn't learn what we didn't learn. And so we need a lot of education to understand the why. And then taking it that step further with the EMDR therapy for me has been just, honestly, I could cry about, like, groundbreaking. funny that happened. Clearly, I'm passionate. So anyway, I hope to bring to you authenticity that makes you passionate about maybe learning this if you don't know, or sharing it with clients that are a little bit stuck so that they can have opportunities to change the way they show up in their lives. Because the beauty of it is it offers full psychotherapy. It's a full psychotherapeutic model. It's not just a tool you pull out sometimes when you're good at it. It's a full approach with 8 full phases. And I think it's just really important that we understand we can achieve full trait changes. It's not just that I don't get triggered. It's that I know I'm enough as I am, no matter what's happening outside of me. And when people can walk out of your office with that new truth about themselves, it's like, I love my job and I love what I do. And, I'm really a difference maker. And so, again, why I'm passionate about spreading the word about it. And I know people who aren't EMDR therapists go, it's so culty, and these EMDR therapists with their cult, like nothing else works. And it's not that nothing else works. It just works so damn well. It's hard not to be like shouted to the sky. So when you're good at it, there's a lot of people that aren't very good at it. So there's that too. So anyway, I'm also Daring Way facilitator. I do Brene Brown's workshops, Rising Strong and Daring Way. And they're really cool, what I would call phase 2 pieces of EMDR, meaning preparation phase where education and all of that stuff happens, so that when we are working with clients, they have adaptive information at the ready that they can grab. And so what I call it is like seeding the pond with some fish so that when they go fishing, they have something to catch. And a lot of people just didn't learn what they didn't learn. And so we're having to front load that data so that they know better when we do the reprocessing. So it's clear I'm not doing anything that I plan to do on my slides. So we're going to see what happens. So EMDR therapy, it helps people heal from symptoms and emotional distress that are a result of things that happened in the past. So if simple examples, veterans are a great example. If I'm in these are common PTSD symptoms where if I'm in war and I hear gunshots and I'm taught your best chance of survival is to drop to the floor, well, that's survival instincts. But now everything gets loaded in my memory network and I don't have time to cry about how scared I am. I have to survive, right? It's truly a bootstraps moment and there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So I come home from war, I'm no longer at risk of being shot, but I hear a car backfire and I slam on my brakes and I put my family at risk because of the way I show up, because the sound reminds me, it takes me to a feeling flashback and I am acting as if the same thing's happening. Or worse, to add the shame to the component, I'm at a birthday party and a balloon pops and I'm in front of, 13 6-year-olds and their parents and I'm on the ground. And now I have to go home and feel like a total loser. Now, these are obvious things that people don't doubt about PTSD, but there's emotional distress that happens that loads in our nervous systems from a really critical parent. And it didn't matter how good of a job I did. Every time I walked in the door, they said, oh, why did you do that? Oh, I thought I told you should do it this way. And no matter what you do, the feedback is always critical, creating a belief in my mind that no matter what I do, not enough. And that carries forward into my adult life where my boss has a little bit of a glare on their face because he can't find his keys earlier and he's annoyed. And I now take it personally that I did something wrong. So it can be so very subtle, the emotional distress that gets locked in our nervous systems when memories are maladaptively encoded. And so when people come in and they say, this is what I'm bothered with, we can reverse engineer what happened to make that symptom lively right now. And we can change it so that doesn't happen anymore. And our brains are so beautifully wired for this, and it's really fun. So we're going to talk about the essence, the science, and the effectiveness of EMDR in this talk today. And ultimately, the history, key principles, and some things that take here. Key principles that underpin EMDR. So how does it work? Why does it work? The neurological and psychological mechanisms that we believe are responsible for EMDR and why it's so effective, and then and how it can treat trauma, not just trauma, but other related disorders. Frankly, I use it for every presentation. I think about the case through this lens every time, all the time, no exceptions. If I have someone with disordered eating, I'm immediately going to attachment. I'm immediately going to what did or didn't happen, 0 to 3. probably 0 to 3, maybe 5. I might be in utero. Maybe there was a I had a client where there was a binge eating issue, and she's like 8 or 9 years old, and she's overweight. Mom's worried, and we uncovered that mom had something physically wrong that prohibited the transfer of nutrition during in utero time. And so we did implicit trauma work with EMDR therapy so the child could resolve that they were starving, and they don't have to overeat now because they're okay now. So that's how beautifully things can connect, and also how we can address them. So the way we can use this is so cool. So for those of you who don't know, this has been around since the 80s. Dr. Francine Shapiro, kind of developed it or discovered it by accident, walking in the park. She notices some things coming to resolution, and she realizes something's going on here. So she dives into some further research about what's going on. And we learned that while like recalling traumatic events and having eye movements, sequences change about the way we hold data. And we can uncover and access the emotions that are stored, the physical sensations that are stored, and the beliefs that come together with the original events that caused things to get kind of encoded or mapped in our nervous systems the way they get mapped. And so basically, so with AIP, Adaptive Information Processing Model, this is the theory by which EMDR was invented. And it suggests that basically we are adaptive creatures. We're all learning. It's a learning theory for those of you who don't know. We learned everything we learned, whether it was epigenetically or in our environments. And some of those things are not so helpful. And when they come in, why do I scream at my child? Why do I road rage? Why do I shut down and hide when I feel shame? My responses, my adaptations were learned at a different time in my life, and some of them aren't so helpful. So when the client comes in, we want to address what is it that you like about how you show up for yourself, and what is it that's missing, and what are we willing to work on and change? What are we willing to unlearn and relearn something that's more helpful for today's time and ecological reality? So basically, EMDR facilitates the processing of stuck or maladaptively encoded information. It's a 3-pronged protocol. So what's cool is it addresses the past, it addresses present scenarios and situations, and it also addresses future potentially anticipatory anxieties or things that we're dealing with or avoiding, or not, performance enhancement type stuff. Like, we can really hit anything with EMDR therapy, but there's specific order of things. And depending on how the case presents, we can choose. We have some clinical decision making that is part of the choice points. But so AIP basically, it suggests that we all are doing the very best that we can with what we know. And I try to think that way. Like, I want to give a generous assumption that whatever it is that you're doing, you don't know another way, or there is something encoded, even possibly positively encoded about your behavior. Like, if I use addiction, or if I do something that's really bad for me, and the negative consequences don't outweigh the positive that I get, like the numbing, or like the checking out, or like the euphoria from whatever my drug of choice is, and that positive feeling is now coupled together in my network, that is an adaptation. So your body needs to unlearn. So there's protocols that address all of this kind of stuff. But ultimately, everything's been learned. We want to decide what we want to unlearn, and we want to relearn something more helpful and more adaptive. And it aims to, I love that it's this natural healing mechanism for those people who are really religious and have like some anxiety or potential avoidance to something like this, because it's like not God, or God is in charge of things. I hear this sometimes where we work, and I tell people, this is God's back door to fix the stuff that wasn't supposed to happen to you, based on what I've gotten to witness in my years of time. And there's no shortcuts. So I hate to tell you, we can't just slap something on this to make this go away. We're hardwired to have all of the emotions, and we don't get to pick and choose which ones we want to blunt or shut down. And so we got to go there, but we can go there much more quickly, and we can review what wasn't reviewed. And then we are able to process and resolve what did or didn't happen. It's not just what happened to us. It's also many times what didn't happen. Think about someone who falls and skins their knees. You see them at Disneyland, and you see the parent that says, little boys don't cry. You need to stand up and quit your crying. And we're at Disneyland, and you need to be grateful. And this poor kid is just totally invalidated for their pain experience. That can turn into trauma. And oftentimes the worst part is how my dad showed up for me when I hurt. And I learned not to cry. And I learned that it's not okay to be vulnerable. And I learned that there's no room for my needs or my emotional experience. Or I have a dad who shows up and says, sweet boy, gosh, there's nothing worse than getting skinned. I'm so sorry that happened to you. And pulls him up on your lap and says, I love you so much. What do you need right now? He says, I need a hug. And so I give him the hug. That usually resolves because we're so adaptive. So oftentimes it's not just what happened. It's what didn't happen or what happened after. What happened that becomes the traumatic material we have to address. And so we deal with what's in front of us, whatever that may be. And it helps the brain to process the traumatic memories that are held so that they no longer hold the disturbing charge that they used to. So the affective resolution is really significant. And it's not that if, something terrible happened and we measure the distress and, is it 0 neutral or 10 the worst you can imagine? And we say, well, it's sad that it happened. And I say, is it still sad that it's happening, or is it sad that it happened? Okay, so can it live neutral in your body like it's not happening now? The way we hold the information changes. And so this is what's so beautiful about being able to change the way something's held. We're not going to change the way memory is. We're just going to change the way how it lives in our body. And that's been my experience day after day, hour after hour with everybody I do this with. It's like, it happened. It's like, like in that movie Inside Out, it's just turned into long-term memory. It's just a thing. The balls is they're done with, and we don't need to keep them right here and alive. So how am I doing on time?
22 after.
Okay. Talking fast. Okay. So 3-pronged approach. We know that we address present triggers. We address past memories that inform what happened to us and how we are showing up today. And then, like I said, we address future things that we need to resolve. The big piece about this that's significant is sometimes therapists will do the trauma work and they won't do future templates. And that's a mistake because present triggers, the absence of a negative doesn't always translate into a positive. So we want to make sure we add adaptive tracks, and that we make sure that if I can kind of dress rehearse the future scenario that's similar, even presented with challenge scenarios, that I can see myself showing up to that boss that I used to get triggered that he would do his face with, whatever. And I would think it was about me. Now I need to rehearse. He calls me into his office and I'm standing in front of him and, he seems rough about something and I don't feel like that's about me. I can get curious, I can be open, I can ask questions, and I don't have to automatically personalize it like I'm a little kid who's getting yelled at by his dad and feel young. Because remember, when we have bad things happen, we end up developmentally and emotionally stuck in those times of our experience. And so then when we're triggered in today, I feel like I'm 12, I feel like I'm 8. I can't believe I keep showing up for myself in these ridiculous ways that are not adult-like. And so that's why we have to address future scenarios as well. We can't just let it lie. Some people who had more secure attachment styles, they'll have the adaptive tracks that hold greater, and you don't have to worry about it quite so much. But raise your hand if you see secure attached people all day long. I don't know. I don't even know if I know secure attachment, but not starting from scratch, not usually on my couch. So anyways, we have to address all those times of what's going on. So while we know that the exact mechanisms are not sure, we know that there's a lot of evidence that supports a whole variety of presenting issues. So like I said, I use it for everything, and it just works. So it treats PTSD, and we recall the events while focusing on bilateral movements. There's other ways we can do stimulation. And we're reprocessing traumatic memories. It reduces the emotional impact. Like I said, it alters the brain activity and the connectivity. And I've got some slides actually from Eamon, from one of his presentations, thank you, that I can show you what the brain looks like before and after EMDR, which I find very helpful because people judge their behaviors. And I show them this slide I have from, I think it's like Harvard or some medical school. And I'm like, this is a physiological thing. We have to address the physiology of what's going on with your body. This isn't just like you have a broken arm and you're going to tough it. You go and like get a sling and get a cast and you address it because you can see that there's no shame in it. But with the brain stuff, people can't see it. And then this helps to unshame. So if you have some data to show them, like, this is normal. You're reacting as if this stuff is going on because look at what your brain can look like. This is part of what I love about Eamon Clinic is you can have them come before, have them get scans, and then after you do your EMDR work with them and they can see the physiological changes, they're like, this is awesome. So these are actual cases that came from a study, I think in 2001 to 2003 that I did. And so I love RAD. And so you can see a couple of cases that he specifically talks about the changes in the way the brain activity is. And that is pretty powerful. And so initial EMDR sessions increase overall brain activity, especially in the prefrontal cortical area, but decrease temporal lobe activity. And after treatment with EMDR, there's increase in prefrontal cortex activity, especially on the left, significant decreased right temporal lobe activity. So we just see physiological change even after one session. And so I personally have the approach that I'm going to do some EMDR, meaning phase 4 on, because it's an 8-phase thing, pretty much every time, even if I'm just dipping into something that's hot and present, because I believe this is like WD-40ing the brain's natural mechanism and innate ability to heal. And I like to keep that moving so that after sessions, there's more pathway. And it's to me more effective that it keeps them moving. So we've got, it rebalances brain activity and memory and emotional processing centers, reduces intensity of traumatic memories and emotions. And like I said before, the way that it's held. And we know that the eye movements help to stimulate the natural thing that happens during REM sleep. And so there's some studies that suggest this is part of why it works. However, we know about, well, Eamon might say more, but I think we know about 10% of what the brain does, and we're learning so much. So we've got all these theories. We just know that it works. I feel like it's pretty magic, and I just tell them, here's what we see, but we don't really know fully why. And there's new research that talks about some of the different changes that we think are going on in the neurobiology. But how we believe it's working is there's an orienting response. So it's mismatching what happened then with what's happening here, and all of our cues as the therapist is grounding, and there's, kind of presentification happening at the same time. And so we're orienting them to the now. So it's not then, it's now. So we have one foot in the past, one foot in the present, and there's a dual awareness component where the relationship orients the person to now. I said the REM sleep, temporal binding via thalamus. I looked up a way to explain that simply. Doesn't exist. You always get us. I was like, ChatGPT, make it more simple, and it was still like. So inter and intra hemispheric activation. This is like right, left hemisphere. We go back, we go forward, we go quantitative, qualitative data when we set up an EMDR target, and prefrontal attentional flexibility, mindfulness, and that meta awareness of now versus then. And you saw the scans on the prefrontal cortex activity. And so there's a huge mindfulness component. If we're not in our body and we had to dissociate to survive, we have to do a re-entry project to get back in the body. And so I don't know if you guys knew this, but PTSD is actually a dissociative disorder. And so we have to go away to survive the things. We have to compartmentalize and check out to a degree. And so I think it's good to know that about dissociation. And the most recent research is done by Adaptable out of Holland. And back in September of 2018, he published the first study about how he believes most of why it works, or a huge chunk of why it works, is that we can tax working memory. So when you think about it, if I'm doing eye movement and they're tapping and there's fuzzies or there's things that are going on to perform EMDR therapy, there's a lot going on, and you can't really be in so much affective distress if you're doing all of these things at once. And so after this research came out at EMDRIA, 6 or 7 of my team, we decided we're going to come back and experiment because this seems too good to be true. And we all decided we're just going to add more things to tax working memory. We're going to up the ante like we just learned about and see what happens. And holy shit, we're popping out of our offices and we're like, I have been stuck on this part for so long with these people. And they're moving through it because they don't have room to dissociate in the reprocessing when I've got so much demand on their working memory at the same time. And so they have to be here when I'm saying name farm animals. You can't be somewhere else. And so it reduces the amount of dissociation that takes place, thus moving us through to resolution more expeditiously. And so I am super a fan of this. Now, it doesn't necessarily address the attachment deficit. So there's a lot of relational interviews that must be focused on and take place in order to shore up the sense of self and the safety of the now and the trust in the therapeutic relationship. But for things that are safety, powerless, adding a lot of taxing working memory when we're doing this work is super powerful. And I was a little skeptical. I was like, we'll see if it holds. I think it's just desensitization. I don't think it's full reprocessing. And sure enough, going back and reassessing targets after a month, 2 months, 3 months, and that they held, I was like, I mean, it's still a 0, it's still a 7. I guess it worked. So I'm a huge believer that adding things to up the ante is helpful with reprocessing. And just like any career or profession, if you have old dogs and you try to introduce something new, there's reluctance because don't dismiss what I've done my whole career. And it's like, but if we know better and we learn better, then it is our responsibility better. So I love being in this field and knowing we can learn and then what? And what else can we do to make it better and more efficient for our clients? So we know that it works through a combination of cognitive and behavioral mechanisms. People can change the way they think about themselves and the traumatic experiences, and ultimately changes negative thought patterns that are associated with PTSD and many other related disorders. So when clients come in and they tell us about their chief complaint or their presenting issues, I hand them this slide. I have laminates in my office. I say, tell me which ones are bugging you. And I write them down under chief complaint. And then I know where are we going. And the symptoms that are most bothersome, those are the ones we're going to go for first. That's where the heat is. That's what we're going to chase. And that's what we're going to address. And so whatever they're doing, I want to know. And however they're showing up, I want to help with. And so one side is more of a hyper-aroused state of being, and the other side is more hypo-aroused, more of your anxiety, shutdown, depression, or hyper-anxiety and shut down more depression and usually more attachment injuries, more complex cases. And of course, we can treat PTSD, anxiety, depression, addiction because of the positive feelings that are associated with use and abuse of certain substances and activities. And so we can desensitize the pairings of those things when people are ready to give those choices up. It doesn't go anywhere if they're holding on with their dear life, like we are not magicians. But if they're ready and they're ready to surrender to learning something else besides their cigarettes or their alcohol or whatever they're using, then it's really effective to treat those presenting issues. And of course, the research that supports the efficacy is there's more than 30 random controlled studies now. So we're not short on research anymore. So if you ever hear that, it's uninformed. It just truly is. So additional applications, am I on time?
It's 12:33.
Okay, I'm okay. I think we're going to get through it without me cutting too many corners. So the thing that I love is that people can come in with their headaches, their migraines, their back pain, their gastro issues, and it addresses somatic disorders and things that are physical in nature, because just like Bessel talks about, the body keeps the score, and the body is the first in and the last out. So we can actually target migraines, anything physical related. Now it's going to go back to their stuff. It's always going to be related. I've never seen it not. I worked with this young man who had cancer, and it was terminal, and he was 24 when I started seeing him. And I had countertransference that I was very aware of, and I decided I was going to use that to my benefit because at the time I had a 24-year-old son. And I was like, I'm going to love on this guy like nobody's loved on him. And if that's what helps get him through, then that's what I'm going to use. And so I had to do a lot of my own vicarious trauma work to keep in this case. But I decided I was going to use it because I was going to help this guy drop the defenses. And no one was going to love him. And no one was going to let him in. And he was going to get cancer and die despite his dad. That's his story. He has so much resentment and rage that he wanted to die because that would get his dad back for him, non-nurturing and non-loving and abusive. And I was like, well, this is not good. This heart that wants to sabotage survival for the cost of your wife and your child. So I held no stops and I brought it in, but he was supposed to die a year after I started seeing that super rare cancer that he had to go to all these doctors super far away. No one had ever seen it. It's like 1% of people get this kind and no medical treatment available for it. And we got him, the goal was survive long enough so his son could turn 4, so that we could get enough attachment so that his son had a possibility of having a securely attached nervous system himself. And he made it till past his 4th birthday. So I cannot say enough about how much I think when someone's willing to do the work and how they can move through their pain. And I got really creative with this case. I'd lay him on the ground, we draw around him, and he drew the pictures of what's happening in his cancer, and we targeted it, and then he changed the colors of the pictures. I did whatever I could come up with to help make this stuff settle down so that he could live a bit longer. And it's just so beautiful. And for people who think it's a robotic thing, it is when you're new. It's supposed to be when you're new. It's just like any fundamental sport. You got to learn how to hold the ball, where to put your hands, how to dribble, use the scripts. But then once you become more efficient and you know what you're doing, then it becomes where you can incorporate an art form, and the relationship is so critical. So it doesn't look robotic or scripted when it's done well by someone who knows what they're doing. But it does feel that way at the beginning. And I had my scripts out, my clipboard, and I was reading, and I'm like, next thing I need to ask you is, but that eventually goes. And case reports talk about strategies that describe the application of EMDR for personality disorders. So I've treated 3 people that when I met them, personality disorder, back when we had it in that label and access to stuff, but they met criteria for borderline and they don't anymore. And because it's complex trauma, it just is. And I think anyone who sees it that way, there's hope for it to change. And it's not an easy case, and you're going to be at it for a while. They're sure going to test you, but it is possible. And there's even ways to treat it in couples, and you can do work with one partner and then the other, and they hold space for one another. And that transference energy and the safety of the relationship is some of the most beautiful work that I've ever gotten to see in my office. And holding, when it's the right kind of person, that space for people to heal through those things. You do parts work, ego states work, IFS, however you like to do it, whatever you call it, structural dissociation. There's, I think, 6 or 7 theories of dissociation. Ultimately, if you understand it through the lens of protection and defense, and you address it from that lens of learning, we can address all of those things. And it's slower going when there's a lot of, defenders, but we can get to it. So treating dissociation and such are usually part of the cases. Back to my initial statement about PTSD, it is a mild dissociative disorder. So that said, evidence speed is fast, it's effective, depending on the complexity of the case. Doesn't mean we're out of there quickly, but we can get quite a bit of work done. And symptom reduction very quickly once we start phases 4 on. There's change that happens in the nervous system. Pretty much always. And sometimes change looks like worse before better, and therapists get freaked out by that, but that's just part of it. We, unlock things and pull the cork, it's going to hurt, but it gets better. And emotion it moves through, it's temporary. So if we can do proper education with our clients about how that's going to be, and I'm going to get you through it, and you're going to get yourself through it, but we're going to do it together, they can make a lot of progress. So here's all the things that I think about why it's awesome. It's faster. It's faster than talk therapy. We get the somatic significant improvements quickly. It doesn't require them to talk about everything. I've worked with people that are not allowed to say things that happened because of their government roles. And so I can go in blind. And as long as we know things are changing, I can keep them moving so that they can pass their polygraphs. So there's a lot of ability to do this kind of stuff with people where they can really get change and move through to more adaptive networks. Again, like I said, it targets the root of the traumatic memory. So I showed this slide, I didn't include it here, but if we look at, there's a weed, and if we just go talk about it, it's like chopping off the top. Next time it's sunny and it rains, it just grows back. So we go to the roots and we pull out the initial start of what's going on. And it can be more efficient at addressing multiple trauma-related symptoms at the same time because of the generalization effect and how we store data. It's not loaded cognitively, it's loaded thematically, it's loaded emotionally, and it's loaded and tied with those negative beliefs that we believe about ourselves. And so that said, it's just efficient. And as you can tell at the speed that I talk, I like things like this. Let's do it. Let's make some changes here. So be structured, standardized, consistent, and effective. And there's data to support it. We're not getting looked at like we have three eyes anymore. That's been nice. Anyways, I think that's the gist of my brief talk on something that takes 8 days to teach.